Working as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the whole wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle. Thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Saturday, episode 200, guys. Episode 200 here on rumble.com/AmRadPod. Glad to have you along with us today. If you haven't already, please smash the thumbs up. Give us a follow if your heart compels you to do that. Also, give us a subscribe. Listen to the audio format of the podcast if you can here on iTunes, Spotify, and iHeart. All of those, appreciate you following us there. We're trying to build up an audience, getting over 1,000 downloads per episode. It's been good as we've gone on this long experience of 200 episodes of the American Radicals Podcast. So it's Saturday and it is Easter weekend. Hope everybody is enjoying their time with family. Hope that maybe you're doing things that are going to be a little bit more austere, a little bit more focused on a biblical worldview as we endeavor to do here on the show. Or you could be doing what I'm going to be doing later today, and that is the most Florida man version of celebrating Easter. I'm sorry, Garrett, but we're going to an event where eggs are going to be dropped out of a helicopter. So there's going to be lots of people, I'm sure, wearing trucker caps and white guys with dreadlocks and maybe some extended earlobes. It'll be a great time. And I know a little part of you will be dying inside to know that I'm doing that. But today on the show, we're going to be doing the grab bag and a couple of long form investigative pieces. One about ADHD, attention deficit hyper disorder, and the fact that we might be misinterpreting what that actually was all of these years. Looking into Stacey Abrams, how she's gone from rags to riches in a pretty short time span, doing apparently nothing. There are now fake stats being put forward in the Department of Education about biases in school. Sounds a lot like what goes on in federal law enforcement, juking the stats. And Joe Biden is looking to get back into politics, or at least getting paid to do politics. And he's having a tough time booking gigs for obvious reasons. So all that and a whole bunch more that we will churn and burn through. But before we do that, let's say thanks to the show's sponsor for today, and that's the M-Clip Company. m-clip.com, m-clip.com, promo code suspendable for these money clips. These are American made. It is a family-owned business, been in business for a couple of decades. They do everything in-house. They're really good looking. They're sleek looking. You will get complimented. I promise you. You can get the metallic look, the leather look. You can get your initials monogrammed on them. They even have the association with Major League Baseball, as now the baseball season is upon us. So if somebody in your life is a fan, get them that, or get the Suspendables money clip, and that has our logo and our emblem on there. All of it you can get for a 10% discount at m-clip.com, and the promo code is suspendable. So here we are on a Saturday of Easter weekend, bringing on Garrett. I'm sure that he's not going to be doing the helicopter version, maybe something a little bit more serious. I think part of you was probably very upset with me, but I am living in a land of milk and honey, so I'm doing my part.
Yeah, I'm just envious of you, Steve. So it's good that it's Easter week because I can reflect on my own sin nature, in this case, envy of the land of milk and honey that you thrive in.
Right. So I've got a couple of long form pieces that we're going to get to, but then there are a couple of short ones too. So it is a full on grab bag. I'm just going to reach in and pull what we got out of there. And the first one that I found was about pulling grants from Harvard, which I believe has the largest endowment of any university in the country. And they're big mad, and they sent out a letter about it. So this is
Harvard.
from Harvard, the Office of the President, the promise of American higher education. But the Trump administration froze $2.2 billion in federal grants to Harvard. They used the DEI angle. They said, hey, they're not doing DEI. They're refusing to stop the DEI, so we're not going to send them money. And Harvard is big mad about that. My problem, though, is that they have an endowment of $53 billion. Why
Dude.
is the American taxpayer sending them one red cent, regardless of where they fall on the diversity, equity, and inclusion culture?
Man, it's so crazy. That's so much money. 2.2 billion, and they got 53 billion in the coffers already. And the taxpayer is on the hook. I I have a hard time forcing this through a proper filter, I think, because I look at it like, you know, my career at the FBI wouldn't even scratch the surface of 2.2 billion. And you can't afford a couple salaries for allegedly congressionally protected whistleblowers. But the government at some point agreed to send Harvard this money. Thankfully, the Trump administration is stepping in the way and saying, not so fast. But where's this going to lead, Steve? I have a feeling that it's going to go to some crooked judge who's going to rule against the Trump administration and say, you got to give the money to Harvard. But what American is for this? I don't care what political stripes you wear. Who would say, yeah, just give Harvard that money? It's absolutely insane to me.
It's 10 figures. $2 billion. $1 billion is $1,000,000,000. How
So
many people got $1
much.
million?
Right.
And we're just sending it away to a private academic institution. It's not even a government. And if it's a government school, you would think that maybe the states, because it's a state school, would handle that if they wanted to use the tax dollars that are in their coffers from their taxpayers base in that state. But you and I'm not living in Massachusetts. Why are my dollars going to fund this university? And I don't care what research they're claiming to do, even if it's good research. Then go and get it independently funded, or pull some of the $50 billion endowment that you have that just continues to grow. You're not eating into that to build new facilities at Harvard, right? Those are donated by some other millionaire or billionaire who wants their name on a building. You don't need that to dig into that to fund the education of the kids. I mean, the kids are paying tuition. So what does the actual endowment exist to do? Well, we just live off the interest, and then as it grows and grows with the stock market. So I don't think they need any assistance. And then also there's the element of it. If you remember, it was last year where Elise Stefanik went out hard against
Oh, yeah.
multiple presidents of universities, and I was able to dig up the clip where this was the dean or the president of Harvard at the time. It was President Gay. And everybody was saying, "Oh, we got a scalp. We got her off because she was plagiarizing all of her stuff." But this was a conversation that she had, and these are the people, because they just replaced her with another communist just like this person, who are going to handle not just the $50 billion endowment, but the $2 billion in grants that the American taxpayers are sending them.
5 minutes.
Dr. Gay, a Harvard student calling for the mass murder of African Americans is not protected free speech at Harvard, correct?
Our commitment to free speech.
It's a yes or no question. Is that corrected? Is that okay for students to call for the mass murder of African Americans at Harvard? Is that protected free speech?
Our commitment to free speech.
It's a yes or no question. Let me ask you this. You are president of Harvard, so I assume you're familiar with the term intifada, correct?
I've heard that term, yes.
And you understand that the use of the term intifada in the context of the Israeli-Arab conflict is indeed a call for violent armed resistance against the state of Israel, including violence against civilians and the genocide of Jews. Are you aware of that?
That type of hateful speech is personally abhorrent to me.
Oh, it's personally abhorrent, but I mean, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gonna stop that from happening. And I mean, like, look, we're kind of free speech people. They want to say that at their university. I'm just not going to go to that university. Not going to let my kids go to that university, and I certainly don't want my taxpayer money to go to it. Even if they were saying we are against Intifada, they just shouldn't have it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's her response there saying, "I'm personally against that type of speech." Uh, why are you delegating that qualifier?
Oh, because I don't
Personally.
want to. I don't want to take too much heat here. I mean, it's like I'm personally against abortion, but
Hmm.
I think it should be up to the women's right to choose.
Right, but you can choose. This is what we talk about all the time here. The problem with the culture. If you can't speak truth to the culture, well, it shows cowardice. It shows that she's just a coward. She probably doesn't want to admit that she's all for the Intifada. But also, if you are aware of free speech in this country and what the First Amendment protects and doesn't protect, you can't you can't incite people to criminal action. And so calls to intifada, that is precisely inciting people to violent criminal action. That's the whole goal of an intifada. And so what she's saying here is, well, I'm personally against that, but you can make your calls for intifada. And it's no, nobody should be calling for intifada.
Well, look, I don't want to be associated with Harvard. I don't want any of my friends or family to go there and support that academic institution. And similarly, I don't want anybody going back to UNC Asheville, which we touched on, who was protesting against pro-lifers by pushing out trannies for reasons. So I went back there for another piece that I know you'll appreciate. This comes from the Blue Banner. Religion continues to influence vaccination decisions. I mean, your sincerely held beliefs might, for a moment, contribute to your decision whether or not you're going to inject a substance foreign to your body into your body. Like, well, perish the thought. So here's their feelings on this. And when I say feelings, it's feelings. Vaccination is one of the greatest public health achievements of the 20th century, reducing infectious diseases and saving millions of lives, said Michelle Boos, medical director at UNCA Health and Counseling Center. According to Pew Research Center, though, people still refuse to get required injections based on their religious influence, not beliefs.
Yeah,
Okay.
required
Quote,
too.
quote, I think education is paramount, and I wish there was greater scientific literacy. So if you just weren't a rube reading your Bible and you understood the science, you would make the right decision. Quote, I think if we were a more scientifically literate society, more people would have an understanding and appreciation for vaccines. So if you had a different religion, right? Uh, so according to this other person, Jason
Sorry,
Wingert.
I had myself muted there. I'm like, wait, what's happening? I thought maybe the AT&T truck was outside my window again.
So there's another faculty member. They quote Jason Wingert. And the more information people have according to severity of illnesses, the more able they are to make decisions. But he's not saying that because you're making any decision. He's making that because he wants you to make the decision he wants for you, and that is to worship science, not actually have sincerely held beliefs that are outside of whatever his false ideology is.
The big thing for me here is okay, so it's basically trying to denigrate religion. As you know, here we have a Christian worldview, so that's where I'm going to go. Right in the beginning, Genesis chapter 1, we are told that we are made in the likeness and image of God. Right there is the roots and the establishment of bodily autonomy. If you are made in God's image and he gave you a brain and he lets you think logical thoughts. I know not everybody does, and we are all fallible to some degree. But if you, in your faith, are rooted in a certain position to do something or not to do something, whether it's if it's explicitly laid out in Scripture, you have to abide by that. But there are what the Greek word is adiaphora, which is things that are like lesser matters. If you're familiar with it, it's in Romans, it's in First Corinthians, where there's this issue over meat, where these new Christians are concerned about meat that has been offered to pagan gods. And these pagan idolatry worshipers, they would sacrifice the meat or use it as an offering, and then they'd resell it in the market, typically for cheaper. And some of these new Christians are like, whoa, that meat was offered to gods. And Paul basically says, cede your freedom to the weaker believer. So if you don't have a problem with eating the meat, we know that those gods are false. Those idols are false idols, and they really have no power, no established existence. That's fine. Go ahead and eat it if you're not convicted on this personal matter. I think it's very similar with the vaccine issue. Most of my life received vaccines, didn't really think much about it because we were told they're safe and effective, especially when I was in the Army. You're getting jabbed with all sorts of stuff. Fast forward a few more years, COVID lands on the scene, and right out of the gates, when they were creating this new quote unquote vaccine, I was really hesitant about it, which forced me then to, in God's image, use the brain that He gave me to go and do my own research, my own exploration to discover if it was okay. Then you run into the fetal cells being used in all sorts of vaccines, not just in the COVID ones. And basically what they're trying to do here is say your religion is stupid and your God is fake and false. And I'm not saying just the Christian religion. They're talking about religion as a whole. So there's all sorts of things in there. And they just want you to worship their God, which is science, which is government. And they just want you to comply.
And that's the perfect way to segue into how this article closes out. And it says, studies have demonstrated that even when religious objections are initially cited, thoughtful conversation can lead to increased vaccine acceptance. So they just indoctrinate you, or clearly using the word thoughtful means that, like, we use our brains, you're just some vile rube who's incapable of carrying a thought or walking and chewing gum. You're not educated like we are at this academic institution like UNC Asheville. It's the Ivies of the Southeast.
It kind of makes me think of Star Wars. We got to get our obligatory movie reference in here. In the very first Star Wars, which was really episode 4, Han Solo meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they're talking about the Force. And Han Solo says something like, your wacky religion is whatever. It's as extinct. All you need is a good blaster at your side. But then fast forward to episode 8 or 9 or whatever, like the newer ones that came out in recent years. And Han Solo is old, and he tells some of these new characters, it's all true. It was all true. So he, in his infancy, really, in his youth, he was like, that hokey pokey religion, you don't need that crap. As he learned and grew and had a different lived experience from that point forward, then he comes full circle and says it was all true. And I just, the knock on the ancient religion, you just believe some stupid ancient religion. And it's like, man, go read your Bible, and because they won't do that, because their Bible is at Harvard in the documents and the studies. And it's this satanic lie that man has risen above.
Han shot first, by the way.
Oh, 100%.
Okay. All right. Back in the grab bag, and also connected to education. This comes from Real Clear Wire, and they did a pretty thorough job investigating this. Multiplication, Biden style. School bias cases doubled under his administration. So, all right. This is a Department of Education arm. Probes handled by the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, OCR, against public schools, colleges, and universities roughly doubled during the Biden administration, topping 20,000 complaints last year. A complainant does not need a personal connection to a school. Okay, anybody can call. Indeed, petitioners don't even have to live in the same state, and legal standing is not a factor. They do not even need to identify themselves. They are not required to try to resolve their problems at this local level or at the school or at the university before notifying the federal Department of Education.
What the heck, man?
Consequently, the office's operations sometimes function as a nationwide anonymous sounding board rather than a source of last resort, a place where anyone can make a federal case out of any slight, real or perceived.
Okay, Steve.
It gets
We
worse, Garrett. What's your thought?
I- after hearing that, how could anyone claim that we live in an alleged land of the free and not under a tyrannical system of government? Does it get more arbitrary than this? You just anybody can make a complaint at this rogue branch of the Department of Education, and we're going to take it and we're going to put the full force of the federal government behind it
No.
because of racism or
Yeah,
whatever.
you could be at risk of losing funds. There could be disciplinary action against you. I mean, there might be referral over to Department of Justice. So, in theory, every complaint is reviewed to determine if it constitutes discrimination on the basis of race, sex, disability. If so, this OCR, Office for Civil Rights, can open an investigation, and its attorneys can allege that there are systemic violations and trigger broader investigations. So, among the
Unless you have a religious objection to a vaccine,
no,
then they're not even going to let you in the school.
you just need to have thoughtful consideration. Among 12,000 ongoing investigations listed in their database, half of which involve disability, this investigative arm, Real Clear Wire, where it's coming from, they found active investigations is going back as far as 2016 and 2017, when the students right now aren't even in school anymore and they're still keeping them open. Okay.
Dude.
Many alleged incidents also triggered more than one investigation, so they've had duplications. The investigations can take years. One particular one from Alabama A&M is under investigation for sexual violence that occurred in August of 2016. I don't know if the police were summoned to that, but they weren't. Also, totals were swollen by one unnamed individual. And this is epic. Okay. In 2022, when this Office of Civil Rights received just under 10,000 complaints, nearly 3 out of 4, 7,300, came from one person.
What the heck?
The same individual slipped a bit the following year, accounting for only 69%. Real Clear
Dude.
Investigations asked several people familiar, and they said, we don't know who they are.
How do you not know?
Because it's anonymous. They can have 3 out of 4 of these thousands of complaints is one crazy person who doesn't have to have a connection to any school and be in the area at all. And they just sit and call and email all day long.
Yeah.
This is an entire arm of a government department that is being driven by one person, by and large, for the entire country.
How is this not akin to what we call here misuse of 911? So even a quote unquote anonymous caller, if they're abusing 911 and they're calling and they're talking nasty to the dispatcher or making stuff up or whatever, you're going to get a ticket and or arrested eventually for that. And I'm sure you dealt with 911 hangups all the time where somebody pocket dialed or misdialed or didn't mean to dial, and then they send a squad car in the area where the call was pinging, and you look for any activity that's out of sorts while the dispatcher tries to get in touch. But then there's actual misuse where you're abusing it, which how is this not that? And how do you just let this anonymous person continue to make these complaints without trying to figure out who they are and tell them to stop or block their access?
You is legitimately a crazy person, and you're still continuing to employ, I'm sure, dozens of attorneys on
Right.
government salaries.
Thanks, taxpayer.
I'm sure there are not an insignificant amount of people who are fully assigned to investigations that are all stemming from one person. We don't know where or when or why. They're just calling to complain about schools that are discriminating.
And this is you could figure this out, because I just think back to our time in the FBI. Sometimes you would get an anonymous tip because you can go on FBI.gov and fill out a digital form and send a tip, and that's all. You get the IP address and whatnot. So yeah, you can jump through hoops to try to mask or obscure what it actually is, but if you're abusing the system, I would imagine even in a place like the FBI, they would do a little bit of due diligence to try to figure out who you are and tell you to stop, or I just, this is absurd.
Mhm. Now, there was another problem with the Biden administration. I don't know if you heard about this little thing called the border invasion. But as a result of the 20, 30, 40, according to J.J. Carroll, 50 million illegal aliens who have flooded across during 4 years, I mean, irrevocably damaging the country. I don't know if we'll ever recover from it.
No, this is how you change a nation, just like that.
So that included some terrorists. But according to Daily Signal, the Biden administration gave the terrorists social security numbers and welfare benefits.
Oh, awesome.
Mm.
Mm.
So they actually did a deep dive and found out, it involves people who were paroled, the people that are supposed to be paroled for like testifying at trial for a week, but instead they just let them stay here. But despite having no other legal status, paroled aliens in the Biden administration were given work authorization, received social security numbers. Of 6,300 paroled illegal foreign nationals with criminal or terrorist records, all given social security numbers, many also received welfare benefits. And this is per the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. So here are the facts, the figures. 905 illegal aliens received a combined $276,000 in Medicaid. 4 of them were on the terrorist watch list. 41 collected a total of $42,000 in unemployment. 22 received a combined $280,000 in student loans. 409 received a combined total of $750,000 in tax refunds. They don't owe taxes because they're illegal aliens. Several received SNAP benefits, and these are not just illegal, but a not unsubstantial number of them were terrorists.
Dude, we've been talking a lot the last couple weeks about how righteousness exalts a nation. This is the opposite of that. This is willful negligence, maybe even willful destruction and intentional destruction of our own nation. Our own government is doing it. And we could sit here and we could pull tons of cases where we could pick apart the problems with the terrorist watch list. That being said, there are legitimate terrorists who are on that watch list as well. Yes, there are times where the government abuses it because we don't live under a government that is righteous. We don't live under a government that wants to exalt the nation. We don't live under a government that wants to be a deacon for your good and punish evil. Sometimes we get it right. Not very often, it seems like. And this is one of those cases where we're not getting it right. There is much to be said about a nation, rule of law, and this is a complete violation of our own rule of law, where we're letting terrorists in. And even set the terrorists aside. You're letting in millions and millions and millions of illegals, and then there's an easy bunny hop over to the child trafficking issue that is also tied in with our lack of a rule of law at our southern border. And here you have the government just again giving your taxpayer dollars to terrorists, to illegals, giving them SNAP benefits, giving them tax refunds. Dude, it just is. It's burdensome, is what it is.
Mm-hmm. And the tax refunds, I think, is probably a nice launching off point for another deep dive investigation. This was done by Real Clear Investigations on former gubernatorial candidate. Well, actually, I mean, she is the actual governor of Georgia, right? Stacey Abrams. If she's not the president of Earth, I believe she made a sci-fi show appearance as such. And they did a long study on the remarkable rags to riches story of the one Stacey Abrams, who just has this adoring look in her eyes at Joe Biden, because she was trying to edge out Kamala Harris and become the vice presidential nominee, even though the only thing she's done politically is be elected to the Georgia House of Representatives. Okay. So we'll dig through this a little bit. Financial records show that when Stacey Abrams entered politics in 2018, not very long ago, 7 years, she had a net worth of less than $100,000. Now, in 2022, 4 years later, the last year she had to publicly file because she's been out of elected office, she was worth $3.2 million.
Thank you for your service.
This is as a state representative in Georgia. They're not paid that much money. So money woes have followed Stacey Abrams since graduating from Yale. She went to Yale Law School. All right. So she's privileged, I guess. 1999, even though she started out in 1999 making $95,000 a year with a signing bonus at a law firm. So she was kind of set up to have financial success. And she ran up a bunch of credit card debts and failed to pay her taxes. And she's never married, has no children. And at that point, she had $230,000 of debt. She had a negative net worth in the early 2000s. Now, back to Real Clear Investigations. Tax filings, personal financial disclosures reveal some of her newfound wealth has come from nonprofits that she's started.
Oh,
Okay.
how about that?
So, including more than $750,000, $750,000 through this Southern Economic Advancement Project, and at least $400,000 from two new Georgia Project tied nonprofits where she worked for part time. She earned $400,000 working part time. The good gig if you can get it. She's written a bunch of these romance novels that are like drivel, and a couple of nonfiction books. I think one of them's called like Minority Candidate or something like that.
I love it that the single childless scam artist is writing romance novels.
Love is love.
What do you
right?
know about romance, Stacy?
She got $800,000 in book advance.
Oh, goodness.
Okay. All right. Full disclosure. I am a best-selling author. At least it said so on Amazon.com. And because I was an employee of the FBI, when I was offered the opportunity to write for the publishing house, Post-Hill Press, they said, Steve, we're going to give you a $25,000 book advance.
Oh, thanks.
I turned it down because I didn't want to accept the money because it could jeopardize my employment. And also because it wasn't about making the money. It was just about the opportunity to push out what I wanted to say. I was offered $25,000. Stacey Abrams, $800,000. I can't even name one of the titles of her books.
Nope.
Right?
Can I'll write a book. Any publishers listening? You got $800K laying around. I'll start writing a book.
So she gets this huge advance. She made so many mistakes on her state financial disclosures when she was a member of the Georgia State House. She had to offer 18 amendments.
Good grief.
She was in office for 4 years.
If she's starting to make all this cheddar, why doesn't she just go to like a tax professional or hire somebody to do them for her?
TurboTax. So she ran for governor for the first time in 2018, and she herself loaned her own campaign, which you can do. Take personal funds, say I'm loaning my campaign, and then I'll pay myself back out of my campaign when I fundraise off of other people, which is kind of dirty. $50,000, even though at the time she had a debt of over $50,000 to the IRS.
Dude.
So she had the funds to pay off her IRS debt, which is not bankruptable, right? Like they will garnish your wages.
They will.
They will come to your house with a gun if necessary to get this. Like we all just lived through April 15th. She owed over $50,000 to the IRS. She also had like bought her mom this new house and a car, and she's loaning her gubernatorial campaign 50 grand. And it's like, yeah, I Wesley Snipes, I just ran out of money. I couldn't pay off my my tax debt. So digging further, a year before she ran for governor the first time, so this would have been in 2017, she founded a fundraising arm for her voter registration nonprofit. So she wanted to start a nonprofit so that she could bilk more people out of more money for herself so she could buy her mom more fancy cars. She starts a nonprofit and says it's for voter turnout. It's called the New Georgia Project. The state ethics board found that the project and its action arm they failed to disclose that they gave over $4 million in contributions and
Ooh.
$3 million in spending towards her campaign for governor. She took
Dude.
a nonprofit that said, we're trying to register and get out the vote. You know, we're going to get as many illegal aliens as possible to vote for me so I can become the duly elected, nothing nefarious, governor of the state of Georgia because of my background in writing failed romance novels and bilking people and not paying my taxes. I am the candidate of the age.
Okay.
And I need to start a nonprofit that will get out the vote, but also give $7 million to me to run for this office.
Yes. How good work if you can get it. But I've got a question, Steve. Why is Paul Sperry from Real Investigations or Real Clear Investigations doing this? Where's the FBI? Where's what is it in Georgia? Is it GBI? What?
GBI.
Where's GBI? Why? How is this woman roaming free?
She's a professional at this. This is this is her actual expertise. Like, she's a savant at playing the system, ripping people off, manipulating it. And when she gets caught, she's part of the approved class, right? Like, the communists will reward their friends and punish their enemies. And she is in very good standing in this, to the extent that she was on the short list to become the vice president of the United States of America, particularly because she helped flip Georgia blue. And, you know, there was a bursted pipe when they were counting the votes. But you can't deny the fact that Georgia has trended more and more blue legitimately in the last few years. And she's been a large part of that. And because she's a good and faithful servant, they're just going to overlook these little things. I mean, it's just $7 million. I've not earned $7 million in my entire life, but she was able to get political donations from people who maybe in good faith donated to this organization to register more people who I'm sure were across all political spectrums, totally not dyed-in-the-wool communists.
Yeah.
And then route that money to Stacey Abrams as she could run for governor and win, even though she got less votes than the other person. Continuing now, it's not over yet. Abrams resigned from this other group called Fair Fight Action. She was on their board before she ran for governor a second time. But the nonprofit nonetheless acted on her behalf during the election. Campaign disclosures reveal an in-kind donation over $500,000 that came from their employees working on her campaign, and $1.5 million in direct donations. So $2 million worth of labor plus cold hard cash that from this organization, this nonprofit that she sat on the board of, they just directly gave it to her to run for governor. She also appoints, I mean, she's communist, right? So she appoints members of her family and close friends to lucrative positions at her nonprofits.
The communists always do that.
And I mean, and she gives them consulting jobs for campaign, right? Because of all the success she's had in losing elections. I mean, I'm sure that they're pulling down at least 6 figures, right?
Yep. Thank you, Stacey. Man. Oh,
Now,
Steve, why did we have to be men of principle?
oh God, man, there is a lot of coin out there to be made. Now, as an entrepreneur, they call her an entrepreneur.
An entrepreneur.
Okay? Like,
Sure,
I mean, I call
yeah.
it a felon, but she built wealth by founding or co-founding a number of private businesses that have also relied on government contracts.
Oh,
Okay.
well.
The big one recently that came out, and I believe we talked about it, was part of the Green New Deal, or I mean the Inflation Reduction Act, where she's part of this group that got $2 billion to give people in rural Georgia, like, I don't know, green appliances. And it's like, didn't you know we reduced this person's electric bill by $90?
Thanks.
It just cost $2 billion,
Yeah.
right? And beyond that, the final one I'll throw out here is that after running for statewide office and helping Joe Biden win Georgia in 2020, Abrams almost overnight has become a multimillionaire with a 41,000 square foot home near Emory University, valued at more than $1.4 million. And she has $727,000 in stocks and bonds. Just a humble government servant.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your service, Stacey. We need more like you. I don't know. I don't know how the republic will continue to thrive without such dedicated public servants.
Mhm.
They're only dedicated to fill their own pockets, just like any other communist ever in
It's a
existence.
very Aaron Burr political outlook. Government exists to line my own pockets. She is an expert at it.
Hmm.
You have to give it to her. She found every single avenue that she could, all the loopholes. I'm sure she, or maybe not her, but she is an attorney, but she has a group around her that looked at the thousands of pages in the Inflation Reduction Act, the
Hmm.
Green New Deal, and said, "Oh, we can get $2 billion sent to us,
Yeah.
and we're just entrepreneurs, right?"
Yep. Man, it is maddening, Steve. Maddening.
All right. So here's a long-term one. And this is one of the longest articles I've ever read. And it
That's saying
comes
something.
Hmm.
Steve is a voracious reader, folks, if you didn't know.
I mostly read Mad Magazine and my own book. But
I read the tales of the X-Men mostly.
the New York Times Magazine, New York Times allegedly at one time was a newspaper. They wrote a long piece in their magazine. And if you look at the image I throw up here, it's just kind of like a bunch of pills that made a picture of a little boy. And the reason that is the article is entitled at the very tippy top in small font. Have we been thinking about ADHD all wrong?
Yes.
They want to hide what it is that they're about to write about. They'd much prefer you to look at that really weird picture of a kid made out of pills of Ritalin and Adderall.
Pills.
All right. All right. Let's dig in this one because you and I both were children who grew up in the 90s, early 2000s, and definitely Ritalin was a thing.
Yes, the big push was our era.
Mhm. And to think historically, we just called it ants in the pants because school, by and large, is designed for girls.
Hmm.
We sit down, we take turns to speak, we raise our hand when we want to speak, and boys, even older boys, they just want to be in Thunderdome.
Yes.
And it's almost as if we're made uniquely different from each other.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Almost like there was intentional design, but behind our differences.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
Recess
Not
was created for the boys. That's why recess exists. They-
It's not providential, it's serendipity only. All right. The number of American children diagnosed with ADHD more than doubled in the early 1990s. That was
Oof.
when it was about 3%. Okay. Fewer than a million patients in 1990, more than 2 million in 93, almost two-thirds of whom were prescribed Ritalin, which was the magic drug, right? Despite Ritalin's rapid growth, no one knew exactly how the medication worked or whether it really
Just
was the
take
best
it.
way to treat children.
Of course, of course. It's
Now,
like a lot of their pharmaceuticals, isn't it, Steve?
I mean, they did the largest trial of all time with the mRNA vaccines. So
Mhm.
we didn't learn that lesson, but they basically did the same thing with Ritalin here with children. So they did this long-term study then after the fact, after we doped the kids up
Yes.
with third derivative crystal meth.
That's how you get a good data set. Hey,
Right.
what happened? Does it say what Ritalin's initial purpose was for, or what it was? Because oftentimes they'll make these drugs, and their goal is to, I don't know, to be like penicillin or something, and then they find out that it works really well for fill in the blank. Does it get into that?
No, there was nothing there about what it originally was designed for. They just know it's an amphetamine.
Mm.
All right. And then there's argument and debate among scientists and doctors who believe that there was actually like biomarkers, like it was an actual brain disease that they
Oh.
were trying to treat. It wasn't just an assessment of like, hey, boys tend to be a little bit more active and energetic than girls. And maybe putting them in a system in which they have to sit in the same chair for 8 hours might make them a little bit antsy.
Hmm.
But let's dig in here. They did eventually do this long-term study and it extrapolated out to a bunch of different branches, but it was called the Multi-Model Treatment of Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder Study,
Sounds like a government name.
MTA. We'll just go with that. All right. MTA, one of the largest studies ever undertaken in the long-term effects of the psychiatric medication that we know as Ritalin. So after 14 months of treatment, children who took Ritalin every day had significantly fewer symptoms than ones who received only behavioral training. And the word went out to clinics, Ritalin is it. It's working. This is why we're going to diagnose it. Okay. The problem is 14 months isn't really long enough to do a study. So The increase in ADHD diagnosis rates was expected to plateau. They said, all right, it's good it went up to 3%. We're finding these kids, they might have an actual brain problem, and it should plateau. But it didn't. Instead, it kept rising, hitting 5.5% in 1997, then 6.6% in 2000. By the mid-2000s, new data told a different and less hopeful story. It was still true that after 14 months of treatment of daily taking the Ritalin medication, the children taking behaved better than those other groups of kids who were getting placebos and kids that were just getting like counseling. The Ritalin takers were better after 14 months. But by 36 months, so about 3 years, the advantage had faded completely, and children in every group, including the comparison groups, displayed exactly the same level of symptoms.
Really? So do you just need more Ritalin? Just up the dose?
Last year, CDC reported that 11% of American children have ADHD. That's 1 in 9 kids. So we might be overdiagnosing. That's a record high. The figure includes 15% of adolescents, 21% of 14-year-old boys. 1 in 5 14-year-old boys, they say, have ADHD. Okay. A quarter of 17-year-old boys. 7 million American children have the diagnosis. Accurately diagnosing ADHD can be challenging. Again, this coming from the New York Times, who is begrudgingly giving you this information in 2025. Now, it's challenging because there's a bunch of reasons. Unlike diabetes, or as I like to call it, diabetes, there is no reliable biological test. It's not actually an affliction of the brain. The diagnostic criteria is the DSM, which is the diagnosis of psychological conditions. Okay. And it requires subjective judgment. So it's kind of up to the doctor about what they see. And they basically have certain criteria that they look at about the kid. And they say, like, well, do they have these certain red flags? It has to be like 6 out of 10. If he's got those 6 today, he's
Get
got
him on the
ADHD.
pills.
But
Yeah.
if we bring him in tomorrow and he's only got 5, then we can't diagnose him, right? So the preferred treatment for ADHD remains stimulants, including Ritalin and the new one, Adderall, which is crystal meth,
Yeah.
right? I'm pretty sure that when the Nazi blitzkrieg rolled through Western Europe, they had jacked up all of their SS troops on Adderall.
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
Good.
And we did too. We
Yeah.
did too. And I believe that Major League Baseball, like in the 70s, they called them greenies. When you're in the dog days of summer, like it was Adderall. All right.
I concluded this when I was in the Army. I came to the position where I said, you know what? It shouldn't be against the law for soldiers to take steroids, to build up as much rage as possible, because you want them to go and fight wars. And I'm sure this could be a divisive topic for people. But when I think of my time in the infantry and I think of the guys around me, I'm fine with you being all roided up and jacked up because it's going to help you be a better warfighter. I'm okay with it. But
That's
that aside,
Captain America.
yeah, make me into Captain America, please. That'd
They
be awesome.
injected that dude with a lot of steroids.
And look, he turned out all right.
Yeah, that's right. He got Peggy Carter in the end. All right, look. While the medications can have a powerful effect on how the kids behave in the classroom, they do little to improve how they learn. So they just behave better. So it's almost as if you really, I mean, and no sarcasm, we are forcing the kids to take this so they behave better so other kids aren't feeling disrupted by them, right? Like that could be the actual, like, well, we're all in this together. But
Yes.
for the individual kid, they might behave better, but they don't learn any better. And that's actually being documented by test scores, right?
Dude, it's just like COVID. It's just like the COVID vaccine. Even if you're healthy, just get it for your neighbor.
So in one study, the subjects who took the medication didn't do any better on any test than the ones who took the placebo. But when the researchers asked them to evaluate their performance, they said that they believed they had done better. It's all about feelings. I
Yes.
feel really good about myself, even though I have just as much failure rate as every other illiterate kid in Baltimore, right? They felt more confident even if their actual abilities didn't improve. Like, no cautionary tales there. Like, hey, look, mom, I
Yeah.
can fly.
Yeah, I'm just popping the pill and it's working because the doctor said it would.
One quote from one of the subject was, on Adderall, you're interested in what you're doing, even if it's boring. The children who take Ritalin for an extended period grow less quickly. All right. So we now have stunted growth. Now, is it temporary? Do they catch up later? If they come off of it, is it completely undone and reversible? Coming from the New York Times Magazine. So the kids who grow less quickly, a 2017 study tracked people until age 25. The ones who had consistently taken the stimulants were about an inch shorter. Their ADHD symptoms, meanwhile, were no better. So all you did was stunt your own growth, and your symptoms didn't improve at all. Researchers also noticed that the subjects weren't particularly interested in talking about the specifics of their disorder. All right, let's say that again. The people that were conducting the studies were talking to the subjects, the people who suffer from this ADHD, and they said, I don't want to talk about my disorder. Instead, they want to talk about the context in which they are now living and how that context has affected their symptoms. So, like, I don't want to talk about how I'm feeling distracted or anxious or anything like that. I just want to talk to you about, like, hey, where I am right now, like this environment, this is really good about making my symptoms kind of go away. So it's almost like it's the school setting that made guys have ants in their pants, and not that the ants in the pants was an underlying pre-existing condition that we should jack them full of crystal meth.
Mhm. I would like to know too how many girls were on Adderall, and
Mm.
I'm pulling just from my own experience because it was when it was heavily pushed was when we were in our adolescent and teen years. And I've got two brothers. One of them is my twin, and teachers and people at the school were basically telling my parents, "You got to get him on Ritalin. He's got ADHD. He's got all the signs. He's got all the symptoms. You got to get him on it." Thankfully, my mom, she's an RN by trade. Right off the bat, she's like, "No, no, 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 no. This he's a boy. He's always been a little more rambunctious than me and our other brother, and he's always had a little more disciplinary issues. I mean, he's in prison for violating his parole." So, and like it, but they were really trying to push the Ritalin onto him, and thankfully, my mom resisted it the whole time and never concurred with their theory. But now, looking at this in the rear view mirror, are we entering an era where Ritalin, Adderall is going to be similar or akin to the opioid pandemic that we had? Because that's the way this is looking after just listening to the bits you're sharing from this.
I always suspected that there was a psychological, like, condition or addiction to it. Like, you think you need it, right? I mean, it's the old Saved by the Bell when Jesse Spano got addicted to caffeine
Oh yeah.
pills, right? Like, they don't think that they can operate without it.
Hmm.
Now, look, as we're rounding this out here, subject after subject told the researchers that they spontaneously brought it up. They weren't prompted. This was a trend that they noticed, that as long as they found their niche and the right fit in school or in the workplace, it's as if their symptoms disappeared.
Ooh, how about that?
As adults, when they had more freedom and they weren't being forced to go for 8 hours a day to public school or whatever the Satan's Youth Ministry is, they had more control of the parameters of their lives, whether to go to college, what to study, what kind of career to pursue. Many of them had sensibly chosen the environments that were better matched for their personality, and their ADHD symptoms had essentially
Hmm.
disappeared.
How about that? And look, even I think most people, men or women, I mean, I got to approach it from a male perspective, but I think of myself, and I don't. I always, followed the rules for the most part. Like, sure, nobody's perfect. I always did pretty good in school. I mean, come on, Steve. I graduated cum laude from the prestigious Marquette
You come
University.
loudly. That's great.
But I think of even myself, especially once I got into college. I didn't like the mandatory classes that
Oh,
everybody had to take. Nobody did.
that's a scam. That's a
It's a
scam to
scam.
keep you there for a couple more years.
Yep, it's 100% a scam. But when I was getting into what I majored in, and I didn't finish it because I would have had to do a lot more, but I minored in international affairs for a little while. I love that stuff. I loved all the constitutional law, criminal law, whatever my core criminology cases classes were. I always really liked them, and I always did really well in them. Same with the international affairs ones. Really liked them, did well. But then, you got to take, I don't know what the math class was I had to take, and I had to take one economics class. I didn't really care for those. Like I'm interested in economics, but I only took it because I had to. I would have rather have taken, another international affairs course or geopolitical course or a different criminology related course. But they said, hey, you got to take one economics class. And lo and behold, that was the worst grade I got in college, because I didn't care for it too
I
much.
just felt like I was filling up my itinerary in order to like get enough credits as
Yeah,
opposed to actually learning
right.
what you were there to learn. Theoretically, you're paying a lot of money for an education as opposed to just getting through it, but
Mhm.
you're really just buying a diploma at the end of it. So two more stories, and you refer to the fact that men and women might be a little bit different. And I think people are cheering, but wrongfully so, that the UK, their Supreme Court, said that is a legal definition of woman now refers to biological sex. And they said, oh,
Oh.
finally, some sanity from these guys who wear the giant powdered wigs. So Britain's highest court ruled Wednesday that only biological and not trans women meet the definition of a woman under equality of law. The decision confirms that single sex services for women, such as refugees, hospital wards, and sports, can exclude trans women, clearing up a legal ambiguity. And everybody thought, all right, finally. Now, here's the crux for me. They're a captured culture. I think the number one name of new babies in England for a long time now is Mohammed. I think this is a stop to like, hey, please don't launch the intifada.
Yeah, don't launch the intifada here. And this has been something that's been going on in Europe for decades now. And it doesn't seem to me that a lot of people are aware of it, but this is 100% part of Islamic plan to take over, is invade the countries, have a bunch of kids. And this has been long standing in France, in England. There are areas of those countries that the police don't even go to anymore because Sharia law is in place in those neighborhoods. And so they don't even bother. And it's only going to continue. But yeah, this is interesting that in the UK, because I see a lot of stuff on Twitter or whatever of stuff going on there. Man, if you think you live in the alleged land of the free here, you think your First Amendment rights get trampled on here, and they do to some degree. It's insane some of the stuff that police are arresting people for over there.
Mm. I think Kyle Serafin's talked about like they basically took the Facebook terms and conditions and made that their legal system at this
Right.
point. Right.
It's crazy.
All right, last one, and we talked about Biden administration problems with giving welfare benefits to illegal aliens, and somehow saying there were civil rights violations by the thousands because one random person across the country keeps reporting it. Now, I wonder why Joe Biden might be struggling with finding speaking gigs for himself because he wants to get back into it, or probably more clearly, Jill Biden wants to, I don't know, get herself a nice new car or something to that effect, or get the accoutrements of being famous again. So now she's trying to trot him out there. And I found a piece in the New York Post about how Joe Biden is struggling to actually get gigs here. And I wonder why. I mean, like, he's certainly not going to say anything controversial.
Still, I remember moving from Scranton, Pennsylvania down to Wilmington, Delaware, and Cole died. My dad moved back to where we could get a job. And I remember I pulled into, my mom would drive us on the Philadelphia Pike connecting Wilmington and Philadelphia. And we lived in an apartment complex. And she'd drive us only about half a mile to Holy Rosary School in Claymont. But it was so dangerous, she wouldn't let us walk up because of access road. And I remember pulling into the parking lot. And I had never seen hardly any black people in Scranton at the time and I was only going in 4th grade. And I remember seeing the kids going by at the time called colored kids on a bus going.
Oh. Dude, how much Adderall and Ritalin is he on to even function at all?
They probably detoxed him for the last 4.5 months in
Like,
order to get him jacked up to then drop a colored people reference.
dude, I mean, okay. I'm not particularly happy with the way the quote unquote new government is going. It certainly is better than it was, but I got a lot of bones to pick still, considering we're still doing a podcast and all. But that guy could have been the president again, or until they said, okay, we got to get rid of him. And I mean, look at like, dude, what is going on there? He is. It's elder abuse at this point.
His ask is
Dang,
$300,000
Steve, we got to get on
per
that circuit.
speech. Now, look, he's offering himself at a discount because apparently Obama started out at 400,000 when he left office, but he still had multiple brain cells to rub together. And then also, you should know that if travel is required, a private jet and expenses for 5 staffers is expected for Joe Biden.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, he needs people to dress him, so he needs staffers with him at all times.
Oh man.
Dude, man, 300K per speech?
Mhm.
Dude, Joe, bump it down to 150. You might get a few more, you know?
I mean, I bet you would get like Turning Points USA to pay him $150,000 just because they would have
Just to
a
buy.
ton of content that they could dunk on.
That's a good idea.
All right, man. I got a palate cleanse, Easter themed one, of course, for the show. But as always, as we head into Easter Sunday tomorrow, your final thoughts on today.
Yeah, for sure. So Easter time for me, I I don't know, man. I get a lot more reflective, I think, or I the last few years especially. Part of it I think is kind of conjoined with my Substack, but I wrote this Easter piece I think like 3 years ago now. I posted it earlier this week, like reposted. But I find myself, or have more than ever, during Easter time, the last handful of years, reading all of the gospel accounts of Christ, and watching YouTube videos and listening to sermons and doing all sorts of additional study just to kind of saturate my brain with it. And considering our circumstances and our position and our former role in government, I really tend to hone in on the role that government played. And it was the Jews, because they had their political, judicial, social, religious system all kind of wrapped into one. And where the Bible talks about Pharisees and Sadducees and officers, like the court, the Sanhedrin was the Jewish court. They had their own police force essentially, but Rome was in charge, and they ruled over Judea at the time, modern day Israel. And so they still had to answer to Rome. And that's where you get Pontius Pilate stepping in, and Herod. And really what's been resonating with me this year is courage and cowardice. The courage that Christ even had to abide by the Father's will for him, which was to ultimately die on that cross and take our sin on he who knew no sin became sin so that we could be free, so that we could turn to him and repent of our sin. And when I think of all of the cowards who were involved, Judas, the Pharisees and Sadducees, the Roman soldiers, the Jewish people, and he still just took it on himself. But I think it also resonates with this Proverbs 14:34 that we've been going through, where it says righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. The Jews and the Romans and us, because of our own sin, our own wickedness, is a reproach. Our own sin is a reproach to ourselves and our family. Collectively, our sin is a reproach to our whole nation. And really, we crucified Christ because of our sinful nature. And it's, I don't know, man. I really tend to think about it a lot, or maybe in like a different or deeper way than I have in the past. But it's a good reminder during this Easter season to remember that man is going to fail you. I mean, think of Judas. He was one of Christ's closest people, one of his disciples, followed him around for 3 years and turns on him in the end because of his own selfish greed. And when you think of the righteousness standard, God's standard of righteousness that we fall short of, that Christ embodied, it is incumbent on us to seek that righteousness, to turn to Christ, and to really try to fulfill what God wants for us and for our lives. And we'll round this out. We'll come with something new next week, but I think it's a good way to round out this righteousness exalts a nation piece.
Proverbs 14:34. The word of God says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. What's the way back? I think I've already said at least a path forward in terms of, if righteousness exalts a nation, we have to know as a church what in the world that is. What's it look like? What's the standard? When we go off into the world, do we have a prophetic vision? Do we have something to actually say in terms of, these are the words of God? God says. Do we come into the world like the early church did in the book of Acts? Do we come into the world with a message that looks like them? Or is ours very different? Does ours placate to the fallen person? Does our message show fear of man rather than fear of God? Do we come into the world like the Apostle Paul, surrounded by idolatry at the Areopagus, saying that Jesus is going to judge the world, and he says, now God commands men everywhere to repent. Here's the message of Jesus. Here's what he's accomplished, and now God commands men everywhere to repent. Do we have that kind of message? Or do we love our stuff and our things and our lives so much? We have so much of a fear of man that we will not speak the truth out there because of the consequences. Oh, and there will be consequences for telling the truth. And will we do it? So I want to propose at least two things, brothers and sisters, as a church. First, preach the gospel. First, preach the gospel. The gospel is the what? Power of God for salvation. The gospel is the power of God for salvation. And so the message we have out there is the message of the apostles and the Lord Jesus. We call people to turn to God and by their faith in Jesus Christ for the gift of eternal life, to be reconciled to God. That's our message to the world out there. And we need to do it with boldness, clarity, without pulling punches. We're broken, we're foul, we're sinners. Our only hope to have peace with God is through faith in Jesus Christ. He's the only way to salvation. It is exclusive only through Christ. It is only His righteousness, His perfect life and death and resurrection. That is all that will save us. And that needs to be the message we say out there, that Jesus is Lord. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That means He is Lord of Lords and King of Kings over every area of life. He has authority everywhere. We call people to repent and believe. And the second thing is brothers and sisters, if righteousness exalts a nation, we had better know what it is. What is it? To be upright, to be just, to be right. What is it? And Scripture is abundantly clear. The sum of your word is truth, and all of your righteous rules endure forever. Amen.
That's really all I got, Steve. I can't really add to that. I think it's perfect. The Easter time is ultimately a celebration of the gospel, of what Christ did for us, as Jeff Durbin lays out there. And you know it better than most, the suffering for truth that you've had to endure. But that's what we're called to. We're called to stand for the truth. No, we're not going to get it right every time. But we must boldly make our stand for the truth. And Jesus Christ is the truth.
You got to be bold, you got to be tough, and you got to be strong. And I know you reject the commercial aspects of this Holy Weekend. But I think an appropriate way for a palate cleanse to set us off is we need this guy auditioning to be the Easter Bunny.
Here comes Peter Cottontail. Eggs aren't the only thing that'll be dying tonight.
I'm sorry, is that the bunny saying that?
If you have to ask, you don't understand the bunny's mindset.
I think I do. He's a bunny bringing candy to children.
Yes, he's a bunny. Why do you think he's holding up a carrot by employing the bunny's certain set of skills? He can gnaw it down into a shape. Slip it between people's ribs.
That's funny. Kudos to Liam Neeson for doing that.
He's doing a Naked Gun remake, by the way, which should be interesting. All right. That's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast, episode 200, guys. And thank you, as always, for your support along the way. We're going to keep grinding away at it, always endeavoring to bring you our thoughts on whatever is out there. And hope that you all have a safe and blessed Easter. Be back with you next week. Until then, guys, happy Easter.
You've been listening to the Voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.